Are we rolling?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Tatiana. All right, so I wanted to do this video to discuss something that's very much on my mind because I see certain things proclaimed to be true that I find not to be true regarding power processing. So mainly what I want to talk about is power processing. If you have any questions, just ask. But what I'll start with is I hear people say, because it's said in HCOBs, you can't run power on clears or OTs. You know, and I hear it said that any case a person has after clear or OT is not their own. It's that of entity case or body thetans or what have you. I don't think that it's too stimulative to talk about that. I really don't see where people have a problem with that. So I'd rather just be direct and not mysterious to anybody who sees this video. Okay, but there is the idea that what we dramatize is not always comes from us, but comes from other beings in our environment that are without bodies and are attached or around their own bodies. I'm not saying that such a thing never happens. As a matter of fact, I know for a fact that it can and does happen. But as a neat and tidy explanation for why anybody who's attested to clear has fully achieved the state as described in Dianetics, the justification being that that's true, but everything after that is somebody else's mind that is influencing yours. There's a number of reasons why that just doesn't wash, but specifically I want to address that in relation to power processing. To begin with, my journey as far as power processing was that not long after having my own state of clear sorted out successfully, I was really interested in getting power processing. As a trained auditor, very experienced, I knew only too well that that as a clear I was barred from getting power processing. And from what I'd seen about how great it was to experience that, it just seemed to me like, why are we denying most people, because most people attest to clear without ever having done power processing, why are we denying everybody that when it seems to be so great? It just did not ring true for me. It just didn't ring true for me. And that's always the most important thing, what rings true for you. And so I contacted a friend of mine and discussed with him the possibility of his running me on power processing. He's very experienced with it. I've gotten to connect with a number of people who were at St. Hill in the early 1960s in the time and place where power processing was being developed. And every one of them that I've listened to lectures by or communicated with, unanimously, they've all said that there's no problem running power on clears. And again, that certainly rang true for me. So this person who was an instructor at St. Hill was perfectly willing to do that, thought it was a good idea. So then I spoke to the person that I'd been using as my own case supervisor for me, a very experienced Class 8 CS and auditor. And I said, how do you feel about case supervising my getting power processing? And his response was, you know, I always wanted to CS power processing on a clear. So we're seeing quite a few cracks in this wall of you just don't do that in most people's perceptions that I'm connected to. So I went ahead and we made the arrangements, and it was great. It was really a great experience, and it made changes for me. And so, of course, that kind of solidified my viewpoint that you do not have to be clear or OT to benefit from power processing, and there's no danger in it. So the next thing I did was make a very, very thorough study of power processing. And I think the main source for good information on power processing is the lectures of John McMasters. And John McMasters makes it very clear that anyone can get power processing. Anyone can and did. This was corroborated by some other reports of other people who were at St. Hill and involved in the development of power processing. One thing I'll try to be brief about is who created power processing. And most people in the church, of course, believe it all came from L. Ron Hubbard. Most people outside the church seem to agree that it was John McMaster's. Well, if you listen to John McMaster's lectures carefully, he was the main person who developed power processing. But Ron Hubbard came up with the original inspiration. At least he shared it with John McMaster's, whether he originated it or got it somewhere else. But it was a collaboration. But anyway, as much as in standard tech, there are all these warnings about the extreme danger of running power on a clear. I've never seen any liabilities to that. I've run power on clears, on OT3s, on OT5s, on OT7s, and it has worked successfully, and it's worked uniformly, and it's worked very well. And one early example I can think of is a person who had done a little bit of audited knots, OT5, and told me that it just went nowhere for her, just didn't work at all. And she actually contacted me and made the statement, my case is a total unsolvable mess. That was her statement to me. So I said, well, would you like a session? And she said, well, I don't have money for a session. I said, I'm not asking for money. If you need help, I'll always give somebody a session when they really need it. We're not talking about, 100 hours of auditing, but sure, I'll give anybody a session who needs it. And so we did a session, and for months afterwards, this person was raving about how this just solved everything for her and has been stable ever since, running power processing on somebody who had gotten up on the grade chart as far as beginning audited knots. Now I know that the viewpoint I've already expressed that some people have, that all case above clear comes from these entities, these body thetans. And, I know that for some people that actually runs very well. That their case, their dramatizations, the things that are affecting them, run beautifully and run perfectly as being run as processed as body thetans. So there's no problem with that. There's no problem with whatever person does that works for them. And I think the idea that we should impose our own ideas about what is true and what isn't true on others is really where the problem is. There's just no need to do that. And I came to the conclusion, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that the truth about case, as opposed to there being one correct way to approach it, the truth is we create our own way in and we create our own way out. The structure or nature of what's behind what we dramatize, it's not necessarily according to any other person's paradigm. So if you create and perceive your case as being derived from incidents, it will run beautifully as incidents. If you create and perceive your case as being a result of the influence of body thetans over you, well, that'll run perfectly that way for you, because that's how you're creating it and that's how you're perceiving it. I don't think it's understood well enough, although I think you'll see references to this in early 1950s Scientology. But creation and perception are not two separate, disrelated things. They're two sides of the same coin. And we create as we perceive, and we perceive as we create. I want to take a moment to pick up a reference from one of Ron Hubbard's associates, one of the researchers at St. Hill, Dennis Stevens, because I recently read what he had said about this a long time ago. And it's very much in alignment with what I've come to conclude, that we create what we perceive what we create, and so our cases will respond to what we perceive and create that they should respond to. Excuse me just a moment, I've got to go pick up this reference. There you are. Hi, sweetheart. All right, so to continue with what Dennis Stevens says, the way I've been saying it is that we create our own way in and we create our own way out. And that creation and perception are two sides of the same coin. Now, it seems that a very important LRH researcher, Dennis Stevens, came to these same conclusions. I think maybe he might be saying it a little better than me. In this article, which I can share with anyone, it's called "The Shape of Apparent Truth," truth being in quotation marks. I'm just going to take a few bite-sized pieces from this whole thing here. But this is a very important statement he takes here. Case takes on the appearance you expect it to take. That's the whole thing in a nutshell. So if you're expecting something to resolve as an incident, it will resolve as an incident. If you're expecting it to resolve as coming from another being, a body thetan, then you know what? It'll resolve that way. And that's why a person would argue that the way they're doing it is the true way. Yeah, because it is. It's just the incorrect statement is that it means that some other way is not true, or that this applies to everybody all the time. It's strictly a matter of the individual viewpoint, what you're creating and perceiving, and how you're creating and perceiving it. He says here, creation is literally everything which anyone has or will create, imagine, and mock up anywhere. This makes the upper part of the process of spiritual awakening fraught with a great deal of wild creation of literally anything. Just to take a few more things here. So how does this affect processing? The frame of reference used in handling case will determine its form. I'm going to say that again. The frame of reference used in handling case will determine its form. So if you become interested in processing case as incidents that really interests and excites you, you go in session and that's what you'll find. And it'll run just great. If you get excited and interested with the idea of case as emanating from body thetans, other beings, and that it's not really yours, well, you know what? That'll work too. Again, the frame of reference used in handling case will determine its form. So if you're looking for body thetans, you'll find body thetans. If you're looking for clusters, you'll find clusters. If you're looking for incidents, you'll find incidents. If you're looking for identities, you'll find identities. And you know what? It really is that simple. And isn't the truth always just that simple? Again, on the same point here, again from Dennis Stevens, and I'm just quoting this because it just parallels my own conclusions, and I think it says it really well, and this has been borne out in auditing. You know, it's borne out when somebody audits using not successfully, and it's borne out when somebody audits using power successfully. You know, how can it be that what seems to be the answer all the time from this auditor's paradigm also seems to be the answer all the time with this other auditor's paradigm, which is so different? Okay, now here's again from Dennis. If someone had a pain and went to a Dianeticist to handle it, the pain would resolve as an engramic incident. If someone were to handle it by solo auditing using solo knots, then it would take the shape of a BT. It's the same pain, perhaps contact with the same narrative incidents. But the apparent nature of the cause will seem different. An engram in one case, an entity in another. So that's the point I want to make about the real basis of addressing case one way or another way. You know, that no one way is necessarily correct or wrong. It boils down to whatever works, and whatever works is based on how one creates their own way in and how one creates their own way out. Dennis says the real as-isness of a condition has no narrative content or identities in it. So, in other words, the conclusion we come to there is it's simply how we create it. That's how it'll process. It will process however we're creating it. Okay. Now, to continue on about power processing. Just to explain power processing, because it's been confidential and so mysterious, it's really a pretty simple thing. In 1950, the book Dianetics came out. and explained all about engram running. And just about a month after Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, was released, there was further tech developed. I have an actual copy here. Okay, this is July, August 1950, the Dianetic Auditor's Bulletin. Okay, this is an original printing, and this was the direction Dianetic research was going in at the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation. Now there's just one thing I want to point out here, because it is part of the journey, the pathway to what became power processing. This is in step 4 of standard procedure. As of July, August 1950, the auditor says to the pre-clear, the file clerk will now give us the engram necessary to resolve the case. Okay, now think about that command, the engram necessary to resolve the case. You'll see in other places, if you research, where it said the next engram or the next incident necessary to resolve the case. Because no one incident, no one engram is going to resolve somebody's entire case. That much we all know already. The point is that what we want is to get the incident that is most dominating the being's consciousness at this point in time. The outer layer of the case that is most affecting the person. And that was the original command. The file clerk will now go to the engram necessary to resolve the case. And that's what's obviously going to produce the most change. And that's what we're trying to do. Now, power processing goes for the same exact thing. If you study John McMaster's lectures, or if you just study power processing well enough, you're going to find that that's what you're getting at with power processing. And that's why people who are successfully processed with power will rave about it forever after, that it was one of the best actions they ever had, because they're getting to the thing that's going to produce the most change for them, the incident necessary to resolve the case. Now, in power processing, the standard command, tell me, I should get this in front of me because I've looked at it so many times, I've revised it and so forth to make it more effective. But tell me an existing condition, you know. Tell me an existing condition. And that existing condition is the effect of that incident necessary to resolve the case. It floats forward in time. So that's exactly what you're going for with power processing. Tell me an existing condition. And what you're applying along with this in power processing is what's called effort processing. Effort processing came out around 1951, 1952. Effort processing is where one directly processes out the energies or forces in an engram, rather than the narrative story of the incident, just the actual forces and energies. And like any other type of case, it's held in place by the fact of two opposing forces creating an impasse of energies, a solidity that in Scientology we call a ridge. So to process this, you've got to process out the energies from both sides, what we call the efforts and the counter-efforts. Now, which one you refer to as the effort and which one you refer to as the counter-effort is arbitrary. But it's just to show that there's opposing forces and you've got to process both of them. This can be used as an assist. You can find it in the assist's handbook. You can take whatever injury or somatic the person is dealing with and you can say, get the effort of that thing or get the counter-effort of that thing. And so you're processing the forces on both sides of it and you're running the energies out. Now this was actually part of power processing. The first command being tell me an existing condition. That existing condition is what the being is perceiving as the efforts of the environment against them, opposing them. The next question, how was that handled? Okay, that gets the being running out their counter effort to the effort. How is that handled? It doesn't mean in the on policy sense of terminatedly resolved. How was it handled? How was it responded to? How was it counter-efforted? So you get tell me an existing condition. And that's an effort at the individual from the environment. How was that handled? Now the being is running their counter-effort to that effort. Okay, and that reduces the value or the power of that engram. And these things, when they have that much influence, are actually in chains. But the advantage of power processing, as opposed to running engrams in chains, is this. When you run engrams in chains, as I was trained on New Era Dianetics, what is called Routine 3RA, R3RA. The command is to run the PC through the incident by the commands, and then if it doesn't erase, look for an earlier incident, and keep going earlier and earlier and earlier. Now the problem with that is that that's not how bank structure works. The bank is entirely out of time sequence. It is not in chronological order. That's the whole point. That's what you learn when you read the Dianetics book, that you are dramatizing and perceiving incidents from other points on the track. You are out of present time. So when you command the pre-clear to look for an incident always in the earlier and earlier direction, what you're doing is you're counter-efforting the being's natural instincts, the file clerk. If you just ask the file clerk for a related incident, then that file clerk could give you the next incident you need to confront, the one that's getting in the way next of getting to basic on this. It doesn't happen to run in chronological order. And that's why this runs so much better and more powerfully than standard Dianetics. So again, with power processing, it's tell me an existing condition. How was that handled? You've gotten the counter effort to that. Once you got that answer, it's all alternate repetitive after that. Tell me an existing condition. And then the file clerk is free to go up and down on the track. This is called cycling on the track. It's really quite brilliant. It just allows you, and the file clerk is you, your own instincts, just looking for whatever the next layer is, instead of trying to go around it or through it to find something in chronological sequence, which is why engram running can grind. It's certainly one reason why it can grind. So then when you say again, tell me an existing condition, now that being is going to get something from either more material on that same incident or a different incident, and they're free to go exactly to that next layer, whatever is emerging next. It is so much more effective for that reason. And then again, how was that handled? Now we're getting the counter effort to that. And in running off these energies, these counter efforts, it's just more effective than having the being recount the incident over and over. Because that's what you really need to run out of the forces and energies. They're very much senior to the significances. You can read more about this in CS Series 6, what the CS is doing. But anyway, this way, then again, tell me an existing condition. And at some point, what happens is there's what's called a revivification. You're going to hit the basic of this existing condition. This is the thing that's most dominating the being's consciousness, the basic on it. And when you hit that, the revivification will occur. It could take place momentarily. It could be such a fast split second, if you're not very perceptive as an auditor and very much occupying the same space as the PC, you could even miss it. Other times, more frequently, it's easier to see that the being is now completely dramatizing the incident. They're dramatizing the tone level, the fear, they're really there and they're responding from there. And when you get that revivification, you're right on the edge of running this out, okay? And you just simply allow them to continue. Don't interrupt. Let them do that. Fully allow the revivification to occur. They won't be looking at you. They'll be looking at the incident, and you just let that happen. And then at some moment, all of a sudden, it's like a magical poof, and it's gone. And very frequently with power processing, it is so completely gone that the person doesn't even know what's gone. They just know something's gone. And they feel very much in present time and very serene. And that's the magic of power processing. And even though, when it came out, power processing came out during the St. Hill period, when I think the first gray chart was in order. Power processing was originally the top of the grade chart. It was the highest level. And it was being marketed with a vengeance. It was actually, you had to buy 50 hours of power processing. It might be done in 4 hours, in which case you used up your 50 hours. So it was a real money maker at the time. And so everybody was being sold power processing. And what's interesting is that even though later, Hubbard said that it can only be run once on a case and must be run at the right point on the grade chart and cannot be run on clears, what you won't find, I don't think, anywhere in HCOBs, but which anybody who was at St. Hill during that period knows, that actually everybody at St. Hill during that period was run on power processing 2 times. And the first time was when they first arrived at St. Hill, whether or not they'd ever had any processing before or not. The first thing they got was power processing. And then again, when they completed their studies and they were leaving, the last thing that was done is running power processing a second time. It's very interesting, the concept of overrun in Scientology. It's come to mean something completely different than its original meaning. The original meaning of overrun was to try to push the pre-clear to run an incident that already erased. To keep running it or rerun it after it was already erased. And that is going to make for a problem. But it came to mean running anything past a point of success. And so therefore, everybody got this idea, and it became a matter of protest anytime somebody ran something successfully, and the idea that they should run it again. Well, I think this is partly a marketing concept, the idea to keep a person moving on to the more expensive things. But many processes in Scientology, most of them, could be run more than once successfully. Grades, objective processes. The main issue is it correct for that being at this point in time? And are they protesting because they've got the idea that it invalidates whatever wins they already had on running the process? In which case they need to be re-educated that that doesn't mean you can't have more wins. And this was very much true with power processing. Now we're circling back to my original point, was that power processing was the updated, improved, further developed and advanced way of running the incident necessary to resolve the case, which is simply the outer layer. Once you handle that incident that is most dominating the consciousness of the pre-clear, well, we all know there's many, many more. And when you strip that one away, there's going to be something else to run that is going to produce just as big an effect. So that's why, and certainly Ron knew this, he ran power processing on people twice. I suspect that because the focus changed after 1967 to getting everybody up and through OT3 as quickly as possible, I think that it was after that point where Ron started saying, don't run somebody on power more than once. But having run power processing on people, sometimes dozens of times, each time coming up with new material and creating a big change every time. And having done this based on what I've seen already accomplished by other auditors doing power processing and people in that time period who did this successfully, the prohibition on running power to do it just once on somebody who is not yet clear and at the right point on the grade chart is completely artificial. It's completely artificial. I've done hundreds of hours of power processing on beings at all, as we call them, levels on the grade chart. I run power processing on brand new people. I think the key understanding of when to run power is just this. Power processing is called the conditions process. And as it turns out, I found that to be a very apt name for it. If somebody is describing some condition they're experiencing, as opposed to a particular somatic or some other type of material, but something that you could call a condition. And again, in Scientology, we define a condition as an operating state, but some overall condition that the person is consciously experiencing that has befallen them. when I get their description and it strikes me as a condition, then I'll run the conditions process of power processing. And just to clarify, there are several power processes. The main one, the core and original power process, came to be numbered power process 6. That is only because as time went by, Ron and John McMasters and perhaps other people who were involved in development kept on undercutting power processing, making it easier to run by developing other processes when some people didn't initially run it so well. So there's power process 4 and power process 5 were the original additions. You know, we're just there to enhance the running of power. All the other processes are just to enhance the running of power processing and to ensure that it runs well. And that's the primary point that I wanted to make. And I want to talk about how I use power processing. Now, power processing can be used towards any condition that a person is experiencing. There is general power process 6, tell me an existing condition. But if a person is complaining of a particular condition that's inflicting them, you can use a sort of a modification of what power process 3 or power process 2 are, where tell me an existing condition of a certain thing. Let's say the person's talking about, I'm just going to make something up, might not be real, can't get out of bed in the morning. So I would say, tell me an existing condition of can't get out of bed in the morning. How was it handled? And whatever basic incident is behind that, as we cycle on the track with the commands, we'll come up and get a clear power processing end result. And it'll be like, wow, it's gone. Whatever that was, it's gone. And it's most remarkable. And there's another thing to understand in comparing power processing to Dianetics. Power processing is simply far more efficient and far-reaching than Dianetics. I really can't see going back to using Dianetics when I can much more thoroughly resolve the same area with addressing it with power processing. Now, there are two basic approaches for Dianetics that I trained on in R3RA, New Era Dianetics. And one is just standard or regular, or what they call pre-assessment R3RA. And that's where we're running engrams by chains. And then there is narrative R3RA. The difference is narrative engram running is the idea that you just want to run a single incident, not a chain. And usually this is done sort of as an assist action on a fairly recent, this lifetime engramic experience. You sort of resist going backtrack or going to earlier incidents on this. Instead, you check for earlier beginnings to the incident and only go back to ask for earlier incidents when it just won't resolve any other way. So in this, I want to reference something from April 1956 called PAB 80, Professional Auditors Bulletin 80. And I think that this is incredibly important. And it's very interesting, too. So I'm just going to pull that out. Here it is. Okay, this is, the PABs were republished in different forms and sold in different binders and different formats, but this is, this particular one is as book 4 of PABs, Professional Auditors Bulletins. And this is PAB number 80, April 17th, 1956. Now, what I'm going to read from here is not the main topic. The first topic here, and the title is Scientology's Most Workable Process. And this is about the process called TRIO, but that's not what I'm referencing now. Turn the page, you'll see bottom rung of Dianetics found. I think this is very interesting. Okay. I'm going to read this excerpt from this certain key quotes here. Dianetics suddenly revived on a discovery I made lately in an area where one would have thought no further discovery was possible. He says the entire subject of games brought to life some new material. Okay, well, what is this new discovery? It is an added bit that engrams contained, and this is capitalized, more important than pain and unconsciousness. That added bit can be briefly stated as the moment of shock. The moment of shock is that period of realization by body and thetan that an overwhelming has occurred. Now this is very, very important. Anyway, towards the end here, Hubbard says, well, that's stripping it pretty bare, but there's more to the subject and I will be covering it later on. Okay, now, fact is, in all my research, I've never seen where LRH developed a process to handle what he describes as the most important aspect of an engram, the moment of shock. Again, engrams contained, it is an added bit that engrams contained more important than pain and unconsciousness. That added bit can be briefly stated as the moment of shock. More important. So all the engram running that was ever done, okay, and the different developments of standard Dianetics and R3RA, they never addressed the most important aspect that Ron Hubbard found to engrams, the moment of shock. You're not going to see it in any engram running command. Never happened. It's pretty important. Well, what I found interesting about this, besides how interesting that is in itself, is that there is a handling for shock. And it was developed by Alan Walter, who was, of course, one of Ron's most important associates, colleagues, and researchers. And I was alluding to the fact that in Dianetics you have engram running by chains, and you have narrative or single incident running. Well, what I'm getting at here is my approach. If somebody comes to me with a condition, I'm going to use power processing. And that is a more effective approach to running engrams that are in chains. But what do you do when somebody has a single devastating incident? Well, I can tell you, because I've come across this, that occasionally when you try running somebody on power processing, that's only happened once or twice, but the person did not go to any other incidents. They continue to describe the one incident over and over. Okay, the thing I do at that point is go to the shock handling. The moment of shock, it's a singular thing as opposed to a chain of incidents. And when I run this moment of shock, it completely lifts, very much with the same effect as the end result of power processing. So, in essence, I've replaced the standard Dianetics, or R3RA, engram running by chains or narrative, with power processing for incidents that are related to other incidents that run in chains, and for a single incident, the moment of shock. I have run both of these approaches hundreds of times, and you can see many success stories about these on my website. And I can tell you that these are there and existent for people who are clear. They're there for people who are OT3. They're for people that are at OT7. These things are in their universes, and they resolve splendidly with these handlings. And in terms of my own approach to processing, what I find even more interesting is the subject of identities. How does the subject of identities relate to engrams or moments of shock? Well, here's what I found out, and I didn't discover this myself, of course. I just, this data was shared with me from Alan Walter's data, which is that any time there is an impactful engrammic moment, a moment of overwhelm or a moment of shock. The being responds with the solution. We're going to take a break here. It's getting too loud. So I see Maria's still here. Are you still here? All right, so you with me, Tatiana?
Yep.
Okay, any questions so far?
No.
Okay. All right, this is being a monologue here. Okay, I like it to be a little more live. Okay, so anyway, to go on to the next phase of what I want to talk about. What's the connection between identities and engrams or moments of shock? Well, as it turns out, anytime we experience an overwhelming engrammic moment of shock, there's a solution that we employ, which is we find or create or become an identity or beingness as a solution to that experience. We're changed by it, by anything of that force or power. We're changed. We adopt a persona. So we've got so many identities, and the power these things have over us is huge. And what I found out from running an identity handling rundown that Alan Walter called Presence 3 is that I know when the Dianetics book came out, the whole idea was you find these incidents, you erase them, and you completely free the being, and you get what he calls a clear. Well, it's not exactly the whole picture. It's not exactly the whole story. And after seeing the changes that happen when you run out everything involved in the identity, it doesn't run out when you erase an engram. You are not running out the solution to that experience when you run out the experience. And there's all these replications of the behaviors and attitudes and related solutions that all derive from this persona that we become in response to every engrammic incident that have so much more impact and influence over our lives and who we are than merely the content of the incident, that I've come to look at engrams, finding and running an engram as the tip of the iceberg. I look at finding that moment of shock or that incident that runs out with power processing as the most important thing about it isn't the change that makes in itself. The most important thing about it is that it now gives us, a link to say, okay, what identity did that experience create you as? And then run a whole identity rundown on that. That's where the real change is. And nearly everybody I run this on makes a similar comment to, wow, can't wait to see how my life will be from this point forward. People don't generally say that after erasing an incident, even on power, but as we go through this identity handling, that's where the real changes are. So as exciting as finding and running an incident is, it's just the tip of the iceberg. After several dozen applications of Presence 3, the identity handling processing, this became really clear to me. That's where the real change is. And this is very much the subject of ELS, and it's very much the subject of goals problems masses, GPM processing, that was researched and came to a dead end in the early 1960s. Identities are far more the core of case than incidents, and identities are far more influential on taking us out of being in present time and being ourselves. And it's just remarkable how much just finding and running an incident is not actually an end-all, but a means, a doorway opening to finding what we really need to run and what's really going to make a difference. And another idea that we have from the philosophy of Dianetics is that the main idea is to delete things, erase things, get rid of things. And, that leaves you with no game. That's really... It's really a bad direction to just focus on that. It will shrink your havingness, and it will send you on a never-ending search downward for more bank. I mean, think about it. If you look at the Dianetics book, let me get a copy of the Dianetics book. You know, just to make a point, and this has been discussed to death, but the definition of the clear as being achieved through running incidents. You know, Dianetically, the optimum individual is called the clear. One will hear much about that word, both as a noun and a verb, in this volume. A clear can be tested for any and all psychoses, neuroses, compulsions, and repressions, all aberrations, and can be examined for any autogenic, that's self-generated diseases, referred to as psychosomatic ills. These tests confirm the clear to be entirely without such ills or aberrations. Additional tests of his intelligence indicated to be high above the current norm. Observation of his activity demonstrates that he pursues existence with vigor and satisfaction. And, you know, this goes on and on. There is the matter of perceptions, attributes, and so forth, you know. And bear in mind that this definition of clear from Dianetics, the Modern Science of Health in 1950, this was formulated and stated that this could be achieved with a certain number of hours of Dianetic procedure. This was before the discovery of past lives. So if you look at it from the viewpoint of no past lives, if it was just a one-life proposition, well then you would think this would be attainable, you know, within a few hundred hours of processing. But when you add to the mix thousands of lifetimes, well, you know, I'm sorry, but you're not going to dig all that out in 10 lifetimes, you know. So if you just go on a search based on erasing past painful incidents as the total solution, you're not going to get there. You're just not. And we've all experienced at some point, you know, in our journey, those of us who were in the Church of Scientology, attesting and seeing other people attest to the state of clear, and then seeing dramatizations and other things, and you know, this created quite an internal conflict. You know, am I clear or am I not clear? If I'm clear, then why does it still happen to me? If that person's clear, why are they doing that? Why are they acting that way? You can't help but notice that you don't see this fulfilled. You do not see this definition of clear fulfilled. And that's not to denigrate what we accomplish when we attest to the state of clear, and we have that moment where everything changes for us. It's big. It's a big difference, but it's not what's described in the book. It's not, you know, and we all need to confront that. And I think that the idea that all of your case after attesting to the state of clear is entity case was real neat and tidy answer. But for most of us, at least, it's just not true. I remember approximately 1980 when one HCOB, one of several redefinitions of clear. This particular definition was clear as a being that no longer has his own reactive mind. That's exactly how it was stated. Now, of course, while the church was keeping confidential the idea of entity case and buddy thetans, what was a person to think that meant? You know, a clear no longer has his own reactive mind. They're making a point of saying that, his own. It doesn't say they no longer have a reactive mind. They're saying they no longer have their own reactive mind. So the natural question is, well, whose reactive mind do they have then? You know, or who has their reactive mind now? You know, it's very confusing and misleading, you know. And I think it was just an attempt to come up with some explanation or justification to say, despite all your aberrative behavior and feelings, you know, we told you the truth, you are clear, and it is what it is. And so, you know, where does that leave a person who's still having all these issues? I mean, that's one of the first questions I ask a person in processing is, what are your spiritual goals? What are your spiritual goals? And if I get an answer like, well, I want to be OT8, you know, I want to be total freedom, you know, these are slogans, you know, these are indoctrinated circuits, you know. What is that? Then you have to ask yourself, well, what would represent that to you? How would you be different? What would you be? How would you be? What would you be able to do? What would be your abilities, perceptions? What would be your state of existence? Those are the real goals, not a point on a chart or a slogan or total freedom or something else, And so, you have people attesting to a point on a grade chart, clear or otherwise, and it is what it is. There are gains, but it's kind of a detour away from the person's actual spiritual goals. And auditing should address the person's own spiritual goals. The actual case that should be processed is the case that stands between you and whatever your spiritual goals are. All the rest doesn't matter. Again, you could spend 10 lifetimes digging out engrams and you still wouldn't be there. In terms of what the actual, what is meant by the state of clear, you have to understand that is a theoretical state. Let me get the Book of Scales, Scientology 08, because I think this says it best what we're talking about there. The Book of Basics or the Book of Scales, and there's a state of case scale in here. Okay, now at the top of the state of case scale says no track, no charge. So in terms of negative case gain, and that's not the whole picture, but let's just look at it from the information in front of us on the state of case scale. The very top is no track, no charge. To me, that would be the intended state of clear. No track, no charge, no aberrations, no case, no engrams in restimulation, no engrams to be restimulated. Okay, that's a theoretical state. As far as I know, I've never met or heard of a being who claimed or demonstrated no track, no charge. But again, that leaves out the whole subject of goals and ability. You could be completely, unaffected, not dramatizing anything, and not accomplishing anything too. So that's not the whole answer. But again, take the term the file clerk. Brilliant concept and totally true. What is the file clerk? The file clerk is described in the Dianetics book as some sort of mechanism that directs the pre-clear to look at exactly what they need to look at. That's not exactly how I see the file clerk, but it is a most magnificent thing, and what I think it is just your instinct to look at exactly what is in the way between you and your goals. And when you come into session, what should be addressed, we call the most basic principle of processing paralleling the mind. Perfect programming would parallel your mind, not be a cookie cutter grade chart. Here's the next thing we do according to this slip of paper which was developed without ever interviewing you. Okay? The perfect auditing would be that which parallels the mind best. And there's a fallacy to that which says that you've got to have a plan of what to do when you approach the person. And no, actually what you need to do is listen. Okay? When you come into session and there's something already on your mind, something that's been disturbing you, affecting you. Well, why? Because that stands in between you and your goals. You want to be serene, or you want to be happy. You want to be accomplishing certain things, but you're not, and this is what's bothering you. This is what you feel is standing in the way. And this is what we called in 1950 the incident necessary to resolve the case. This is the thing. It's right there. You don't even have to ask for it. All you have to say is something like, well, what's on your mind? Tell me how you're doing. And like 9 out of 10 times, you're going to tell me exactly what it is we need to be addressing. Now, auditors in a church are trained to operate off of their plan. And so they come into session and the next case supervised action is this process. And then you say, okay, this is the session, but maybe the pre-clear's needle isn't floating. So what's happening? Oh, this thing is upsetting So what is an auditor trained to do with standard tech? What they're trained to do is to throw that under the rug so they can run what they want to run instead of what's actually impinging in between you and your goals with this pre-programmed cookie-cutter approach. So you say yada 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 this thing. Oh, okay. Is there an earlier similar ARC break? Now what you're doing is treating it like what they call a rudiment. And basically the definition of a rudiment is that thing you've got to get out of the way that the pre-clear is talking about so you can run what you want to run on them. You have to laugh. I mean, here the pre-clear is telling you what they need addressed, and you're saying, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're actually not going to audit that because rudiments is not auditing. Rudiments is defined as indicating bypass charge so that it'll destimulate. Okay, you haven't actually addressed the material. You haven't run anything out. You said, okay, find some earlier point of restimulation of that thing, and they go, oh yeah, that's what triggered it. Oh, that's all it is. I feel fine about this for the moment, and then the auditor can run what they want to run on you. But you'll see the pattern of the pre-clear coming into session after session with the same kind of ARC break, and then we'll just shove it back under the rug with rudiments. No, that's the file clerk. That is the being saying, this right here that I'm talking about, here it is. Please take it. And if you want to help the pre-clear and produce the most gains, then you help them with that. You address that. That's the thing, because you have goals, Tatiana. You have your own goals. They're not going to be necessarily identical to mine or anyone else's, but they're what matter most to you because you set these things to be accomplished. And you win to the degree that they're accomplished. And you lose to the degree that they're not accomplished. And this is why people can get 70 intensives of auditing by the grade chart, get a legitimate floating needle by the standard tech approach of restimulating something in the pre-clear with an auditing question or command so that you can run that material, and you can find it and be interested in what you find, and you can get that nice floaty feeling of a floating needle, and you can still find you go out in life and you're still up against the same things you were up against before. Because what you are interested in is what you are interested in. It's called your goals. And whatever is getting in the way, giving you losses, causing dramatizations that interfere with accomplishing that which is important to you. That's what needs to be addressed. That's paralleling the mind, and that's what produces case gain. And that's why my approach is when a person has something like that, something that they feel is in their way, something that's disturbing to them, that's the thing to approach. If a person comes in front of me and says, well, I really feel good, but I need more horsepower towards doing this or that or the other thing, but they're not really having any incidents or something that's that's taking them down the tone scale, that's getting in the way. Well, fine, that's great. Let's run some ability processes. Let's take something from creation of human ability that applies to that goal or that ability, or something from Alan Walter's materials. Then let's just directly address that. That's beautiful when that happens. But 19 out of 20 times, or 98 out of 100 times, when you say what's on your mind, you're going to get what's in between the person and their goals and what needs to be resolved. And again, if it's a particular occurrence that's on their mind, then, is there a moment of shock connected to that? And 100% of the time, the answer is yes. And you get a magnificent change by running the shock handling. If they're talking about something and they're not a specific incident that they're stuck in, but a feeling or a condition, then the conditions process, power processing, and hit that moment of boom, it's gone. I don't even know what it was, but it's gone, and I feel serene and I feel powerful. And that happens, okay? Then I would use the identity handling, and that's what I do, and much bigger changes occur. People are different after that, and very relieved and far more able to pursue their goals because now they're not being somebody else as a solution to something that is no longer happening. So instead of unconsciously addressing something that isn't there anymore, now you can directly be addressing your goals, or at least get on to the next thing that's in the way and handle that. Now there's something more about identity handling that ties in with the point I'm making about you can't just delete things and approach it as negative gain processing and get rid of things. And this applies to many identities as well. Identities are created because they're a solution to something. They're a tool. They're useful, And so if you just approach, well, in Scientology you'll use the word valences, okay? But if you approach valences or identities as something to simply erase, okay, what you're doing is taking away the being's tools. There's more to it than that. For instance, identities are not all negative or necessarily negative. The trick is to not be unconsciously replicating the attitudes and behavior patterns of some persona that is not yourself, and lose control of it and be walking around with that influence, being this other thing. Of course, that's incredibly damaging and incredibly self-defeating. However, there can be many situations in life. When you play a game, there's always a role in a game to play. There's a beingness. When I'm playing basketball, I'm going to have my game face on, and I'm going to want to run through that guy that's twice my size and take satisfaction in that, and I'm going to have that kind of a beingness because that's part of the game, But I'm not going to lose myself in that, and knock over the old lady on the sidewalk who gets in front of me when I'm walking home. It's just a tool to be used consciously where it is appropriate to a situation and then put back in the tool chest. Okay, that's the value of an identity, is where it fits in a situation for a particular game. It's perfectly valid to take it out. To look at an identity as something purely destructive it's not. What's destructive is some unconscious replication, some unconscious influence over your perceptions, your decisions, and your behavior. The key word is unconscious. It's like saying guns are destructive. Guns are not destructive. They're guns. Guns are protective. They're not protective. They're guns. If you use a gun destructively, okay, that's a misuse. Okay, if you use a gun protectively, that's appropriate. Well, that's how it is with identities. So when we do the full identity handling of this rundown called Presence 3, unless it's just a completely useless identity, and some are, if they are, then we just run those out and don't go very far past that with the rundown. Okay, but very frequently, those identities have value in various games. So what you want to do is run the differences, run out the positive and negatives of that identity, how that identity can work in harmony with other identities, how that identity can be a positive. And you can use that in a situation where it will further your journey towards your goals. If you have goals, you have games, and therefore you have roles involved in those games. So if you were to strip all identities, you might be back to nothingness and you might be very bored, and then you'd want a game, and then you'd start the cycle all over again. So what's fascinating about this identity handling is that it doesn't make the mistake of just erase everything and leave nothing behind. What you want to do, it rehabilitates the being's abilities to create. It's a creative thing, but to create consciously is always the key. That pretty much sums up all I want to get across in this one video. Any questions, Tatiana? Can I get in a word edgewise, or are you going to keep talking? What would you like to say?
About the definition of clear, when you read it from the book, it was kind of getting rid of this, getting rid of that, doesn't have this illness, doesn't have these pictures. It's kind of all negative defined.
Right.
While it seems would be right is accenting on who you are, who you become, how much yourself you become, how much aware of yourself, who you really are, you become. How much clearer you see yourself, and the other, I would accent on that. How clear you are is how clear you are, not how clear you are not.
Right.
Those bunks.
Right.
It's how clear you.
Right. Not just all the things you're not.
Yeah, it's not what you get rid of, what you washed away. It's about. It doesn't even matter what it was. It's.
Right. Ideally, I think you would be able to mock up or create anything. What you wouldn't do is lose consciousness over that creating. You know, it relates to as-isness, you know, which is creation without persistence. You create something, the Latin term ad hoc, for this particular occurrence, environment, or situation. Okay? And then you don't unconsciously create it on an automaticity ever afterward and be stuck in it. You know, but it's a key ability to be able to create. You know, it's about the self emerging and the games a person can choose to play and the goals they can mock up and achieve for themselves. And we look at the term as-isness. This is something else that's really dimly understood in Scientology because, again, we relate the whole idea of as-isness to making things disappear, you know, making things go away. You know, if you think about it, the philosophy of just deleting things and erasing things and making things go away, isn't that a really grim look at the universe? Like, it's all bad and we just have to get rid of everything.
Yeah, be free of something doesn't mean to get rid of something. It means to be independent of something, not get rid of it.
Right, and it means to be consciously causative. You know, that's what it means. It does not mean to be alone in a void with nothing going on. You know, nothing's affecting me now. You know, I mean, it's like you could bypass all of this processing to achieve that effect by getting a bottle of scotch and going into a closet and closing the door. You'd be, you know, there'd be nothing else to affect you. You could get quite a release that way. But I don't think it's really anybody's goal.
Talking about the goal, do you think that the auditing is going to be as much effective as the pre-clear is aware of the goal that he puts himself, and as much as the goal is positive oriented? Okay, like for example, I remember the huge success on my grade 2, because I arrived there with a goal, and actually Marty, he asked me first what was my goal. Uh-huh. And I didn't have problem to formulate it because it was there. I knew it. I was very aware. I want to gain back my integrity. I want this feeling, you know, back. I know how it feels, and I want it back. And that was my goal. And I had tremendous. I think it was compared only to objectives gain on this grade 2. What do you think of success from the process or whatever action compared to the goal that person was aware to begin with?
Oh, well, that's the whole point of processing. Absolutely. And that point gets lost in doing a cookie cutter grade chart where I'll tell you what your goal is. Your goal is total freedom. Your goal is ability to communicate about anything with anybody. I mean, you know, if you think about it, the grade chart is okay, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to say it's a bit of an implant. You know, these are your goals. This is what you want. You want this, then you want that, then you want the other thing. You know, but actually the most important thing is to be oriented towards your own goals and to be processed towards your own goals. There's a very basic part at the start of processing. Alan Walter has his own approach for this of what he calls vital fundamentals. You know, in the early 60s, we developed, you know, in Scientology, model session processes, and these involve, you know, basically identifying you and identifying your goals and identifying the processor and going from there. I have a whole basic auditing setup program, which borrows largely from the introductory and demonstration processes handbook, which I cannot recommend enough to anybody who wants to audit at any level. There's so many key things. You know, the most important things are simple basics, okay? And included in this basic auditing setup program, questions like, who should I be to help you successfully? You know, you identify the auditor, you establish the auditor, you establish the pre-clear. There's a very key point in this, which, you know, you're actually addressing I just want to find exactly where I have it on this program here. Okay, establish the pre-clear. This is the very first process on my basic auditing setup program. Very first. And the very first question is, what would you like to accomplish through Scientology? Question number one. What's your goal? What would you like to accomplish through Scientology? That's the starting point. So, yes, any auditor who starts off establishing and addressing your goals.
Setting up for the success, but it's kind of get lost. I don't hear this much about asking about the goal. Like it's, and that what makes it boring. There's, what kind of game is it if there is no goal? It's kind of boring game.
Exactly, because your goals define your interests. So when you're being sold, a program or whatever, this is what you do, and go any other way but what are your goals, and then directly address that with processing oriented towards whatever those goals are, or to remove whatever is in the way of those goals. Anything else is of slight value and probably not worth the money and time.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the whole point of things. That's the whole point, and that's what we mean by paralleling the mind. There's your goals, and there's whatever seems to be blocking your success towards your goals. These are the things to process.